Hello, this is Karen Johnson, and we're having another of our series of Proctor's History videotapes. Today is Thursday, September 26, 2013, and we're very pleased today to have as our guest Lionel Barthold, who has been involved with Proctor's for a long, long time. Do you want to talk about your early memories of Proctor's?
Well, I first went on the board in 1984. You tell me. The problem in being old enough to be useful in a history interview is that you forget your history. Karen's been very good. I joined the board in '84, which was next year would be 40 years ago. So, and at that time, the theater was just getting on its feet from having been acquired by, what was it, Schenectady Arts?
Acts. A new corporation, and they formed in '77, and then in '79 was their first show, so you were very close to the earliest days.
Right. And Dennis Madden, I think it was the manager of the theater at that time. It was amazing just to get the theater active again and get shows up and going. So those were the earliest days I remember. The board at that time was a special kind of group. I mean, they were people that were willing to roll up their sleeves and work. There was very little structure to the organization itself. There was the manager, and that was about it. So that's how the actual operations got going. We succeeded in booking some pretty good shows. The bookkeeping was a little bit sloppy, and there were some ventures that were planned that didn't come off, and it was apparently probably 5 years after that started that the theater needed stricter management.
Do you remember any of the projects that were going on? Was there a lot of construction and repair of the building during that period?
Yeah, of course the building had been vacant for quite a few years, I guess, by the time Acts took it over. So there was a lot of repair work to be done, and the board was comprised of people that were willing to roll up their sleeves and help with it.
Do you remember why you might have been recruited?
I have no idea. I liked the theater. We attended. It seemed fascinating to me. It was totally out of my realm of experience. And I enjoyed it. The board at that time recognized that it needed more executive talent. And so that was one of the agenda items or the objectives, to recruit some businessmen onto it. And we succeeded a couple of times to do that, only to lose the members after a couple of meetings because they were not interested in what color the dressing rooms were going to be painted, or what type of wood to use for this or that, and they were used to different kind of they had essentially were not called on to contribute very much, so then they left. So.
Probably just get money.
Right.
Because money is always, I mean, that was a very difficult time to keep the theater going. And
I've forgotten there was one big dance-a-thon or something that was planned at the airport. And it was planned, but it was obvious before it came off that it was going to lose a lot of money. It was canceled, and that was when it was clear that needed some kind of rescue committee to get Proctors on a good footing.
So there was, and Betty Apkarian was on the board with you,
Right.
and she was working on her husband to see
Right.
what he might consider, Harry Apkarian.
Right.
And so there were some conversations. Were you involved in any of those, thinking about how we might change the board to a different
Yes,
level?
I think a lot of the board at that time recognized we needed a different kind of governance direction, that we needed business people, we needed some higher level people that could shake the trees and get money out of them, and who had a better business insight into how to operate any enterprise. And I've forgotten exactly the origins of it, but I know Betty was involved in setting up a committee, and I don't remember what we called it, a rescue committee or something of that sort, which was intended to be an ad hoc committee to set the theater straight, see what where to go with it. And that committee, I know Harry Apkarian was on it, Russ Knowles was on it, the top Schenectady GE executive. I was on it. Who else was on it? You've
Well,
got the
I
list.
happen to have it, just
Okay. You gave it.
incidentally. Bill Dake,
Bill Dake was on it.
Bob Freihofer,
Bob Freihofer, also who
Louis
else?
Golub,
Yeah, Louis Golub of Price Choppers was on it,
Ken Lally.
and Ken Lally. So it was, and that group met, and the first objective was, of course, to figure out what is the financial position of the theater. The records were not very orderly. They were in boxes and so forth. So Russ Knoll had some volunteer help from GE come in, a bunch of auditors, finance people, put it all together. Spent a lot of time, and concluded that we were, I think, $1.5 million in debt. And about that time, it became apparent that the so-called rescue committee, which had by then come up with ideas for capital campaigns and how things ought to be done, was probably a more logical board than the initial board. We needed a chairman, and Harry Apkarian was, having been absent at one meeting, in his absence was elected chairman of the board. To his credit, he did not undo that when he learned of it. The then existing board recognized this was a good move, and they resigned. And that was really a major turning point, I think, in the theater.
It was sort of a deal, it's because I remember being at that meeting. It was a meeting at Ernie Kahn's house where we just basically all resigned, and saying this would be a temporary board, but it's still there today.
That's right. And that board, under Harry Apkarian's direction, became a very strong, very effective board, as effective a board as I've ever been on for a 501c3 organization.
And one of the things that they did is many of the board members actually loaned some money to the theater at a very modest rate of interest.
Right. That was a transitional move that had to be made in view of the debt situation.
And then there were some staffing changes, and
well, we obviously needed a new theater manager. And the that move was, I guess we had a search. Who was the first manager?
Well, Don Shane came in
Don Shane
first.
was there for a little while.
Right.
And then Gloria Lemire.
Mm-hmm.
Gloria Lemire was, I think, initially regarded as an interim manager. And there was, in fact, a search committee put together to find a permanent director of the theater. That committee was not, didn't feel it urgent to replace Gloria because she was doing a good job. And after a while, it disbanded because she was doing a fine job. And she did a very, very effective job for quite some years. That was what you might consider the second phase, I think, of the theater. She unfortunately got very sick and had to be replaced. And that led to the appointment of a second search committee.
Of which you were the chairman, I
Which
believe.
I was the chairman, yes. And that was an interesting experience. We had hired a New York firm to help us. They were professionals at this, and they supplied 2 candidates that we interviewed. Both seemed up to the job. The job at that point being managing a theater that presented shows. It was a simple scope. They both of them had experience in doing that. And we had a third candidate who was coming from Western New York. His name was Philip Morris. So he came here for an interview, and we had a lunch I'll never forget at the Glenn Sanders mansion. He was different. That was clear from the beginning, in appearance, in his attitude, and I think to quite an extent in his experience, because he was the only one that had taken the theater group there and seen it as having a bigger role in the community, and he integrated it with other things that were going on. And he talked a great line, and we liked it. What I remember distinctly about that luncheon meeting was that at some point, well, we had one of the members of the search committee, an executive in Schenectady, I won't name him, was very talented executive, but not used to being argued with. You didn't tell him he was wrong without your own peril, and the conversation went on to some aspect of theater, and this member of the committee, made a statement at which Philip responded by saying, well, I understand where you're coming from, but you're wrong. And all of us sort of stood back for the fireworks. Then he explained why this fellow was wrong. And so the conversation went on, and when the lunch was finished, the chairs were pulled back, and the board member I'm talking about came to me, whispered in my ear and said, "He's your man."
Which
and he was right.
Had you already made a decision yourself?
I was sold already, yes, because a reason I've mentioned, he knew how to run a theater, that was clear, but he also saw far beyond the theater into the way a presentation venue like this fit into the community, and it was a part of the community. He talked a different language. And we were very fortunate in having him as a candidate and having picked him.
I heard that when you delivered the message that he was going to be hired, he responded to, "Yes, but you have to seduce me to come." Do you remember that story?
Yes. Yes, he said that, but I think he was sold from the beginning, because he could see in Schenectady and in this the environment we were in, an opportunity to do in spades what he'd already done on a small scale before. He was right. And when he said yes, we knew we were in for a ride. We also knew that he meant it, because the first, I don't think it was a month after we had agreed to hire him and made a contract, that he bought a house in the Stockade. So he was clearly here to stay and make all of it, which he did.
What are the things that Philip has done that you find the most satisfying in this relationship?
Well, I think I have some management background, as do most of the members of the board, and what a board what makes it easy to manage somebody, whether it's in a corporation or in a group like this, is to have somebody that's full of initiative, where your function as a manager is to give direction, not goading, right?
Mm-hmm.
I call it management by restraint rather than pushing, right? And that's exactly the characteristic that Philip has. I mean, you don't have to give him ideas of what to do. You have to guide him and restrain him on his ideas. And from that standpoint, he's been one of the most pleasurable CEOs I've ever encountered. His breadth of understanding is incredible. I've never, I mean, and you would never, for example, think that someone who understood theater had the background and experience he had in arts. You would never expect someone like that to understand in detail finance. We went through an expansion, a major expansion of theater, in which the corporate structure of the theater was incredibly complicated. We had about 6 different sub-companies, temporary companies, and so forth, and organized in order to better raise funds, in order to get better tax advantage of what we were doing, and so forth. And I don't think there were more than 2 or 3 board members, and Philip, that really understood how that was working.
It was remarkable.
It was remarkable.
Fortunately, some of those corporations are going away.
Right. It's getting simpler.
Yes, that's good. So it's been quite a ride, and you've seen this incredible change here. It must make you feel very proud of.
Well, I think I would speak for all the board members that Proctors has been one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever seen. It's been a winner. It's embraced by the community. We have a success story. We have. I think it's been important to Schenectady. I think it's been particularly in the bad times that the city's gone through, to have one success story central to it. So I wouldn't replace that experience for anything.
Well, Proctors has been lucky to have you as part of it as well, because certainly your great wisdom has been an asset. And
well, there's a lot of, I'm sure we have one of the strongest arts boards in the state. We have some exceptional, always have had exceptional people on our board. We had, I think we've had unusual quality of governance all over, throughout the organization. Shortly after Philip took hold, we began to, we realized that it would be in our interest to expand the committee structure we have. I don't know, we have 7 or 8 committees now, one for marketing, one for finance, we have a governance committee, an education committee. These are all very active, and every board member is active on one committee. You wouldn't believe that an organization like ours, which now has a budget of what, $15 million or something of that order, could meet every other month for 1 hour. And the reason that works, and that's, I think, that's helped to keep board members active, and knowing that that's the extent of their time commitment. But the fact is that now most of the work is done within committees. Mm-hmm. So that when we come for a board meeting, the committee's reporting and making a recommendation. It's not being settled at the board meeting. It's worked very well. It's probably the best example I've ever seen of strategic planning. Strategic planning is something everyone is supposed to do. It usually winds up in a meeting, writing a report on what you've already done. It's a historic document describing who you are. And then it goes on a bookshelf, and it's been quite different with Proctors. We've had meetings at which strategies have been evolved, and they've guided us in the way we've behaved. So
and certainly the reach of the theater has grown in the last 10 years incredibly.
Oh yeah,
geographically.
I mean, well, it's much more than the theater now. I mean, it's if you look at all the things that are going on, the presentation stage still is central to it, but the educational programs, you pull up on Erie Boulevard on a weekday and you see, it's nothing to see a dozen school buses parked there. There's scarcely a night that's 1 or 2 things aren't going on here. It's the expansion. Of course, we haven't talked about the expansion, but the expansion of this theater was also a very heroic undertaking that.
So did you believe it could be done when it started?
I believed it. I think the board believed that we realized long before that something had to happen in the Tri-City area, because we simply couldn't book the big shows anymore. They were getting bigger, they needed more stage area and so forth. So there was a period of probably 5 years where we were looking at the Palace Theater in Albany and saying, well, maybe they're going to do it, maybe we should do it, but someone had to expand to accommodate what was available on the market in the way of big shows, Lion King, shows like that. And there was a lot of discussion about who's going to do it. We did a study and realized that there was not enough market for both the Palace and ourselves to do it. And at one board meeting, after 4 or 5 years of this, we just decided to do it. That was courageous. It was, everybody was a little bit nervous, but it worked. It worked.
And you did it.
We did it.
That's the best part.
I forgot how much, you probably know the numbers we raised, but we raised a lot of money.
Well, with the heating plant, it was about almost $30 million.
$30 million, and we started out with well, any financial campaign starts with a feasibility study, which is usually conducted and was then by a professional who tells you how much you can raise. We outdid him by quite a bit.
Yes. Though the heating plant, I don't think was in the original budgeting for the expansion, but it came along later.
It came along later, and again, well, it was part of it in the, see, Philip recognized that a lot of this money was going to come from grants, and that there was a different set of rules for heating plants, and power plants, and so forth. So it was financed separately from the main campaign, largely because there were different resources. That in itself was a pretty clever decision. But we supply, we started out as a theater going back to Dennis Madden's day presenting shows. Now we supply heating and cool air to this part of Schenectady.
And lunch to the rest of the people in
And lunch to the rest of the people. And here as we meet, there's a big convention going on in the theater area.
It's exciting times.
Yeah.
Are there any other stories or memories you have you'd like to mention?
No, I think we've. I'm grateful, very grateful for the years I've had involvement with Proctors. It's been very exciting, and I'm sure that looking back on where we are now, another 20 years from now, that progress will continue, and we'll be doing something we've never dreamed of.
So you're not making any predictions?
I'm not making any predictions. We don't have a prediction committee.
Well, maybe we could have one. Well, Lionel, thank you so much for your
You're
time
welcome.
today, and we appreciate your watching, and hope you'll join us on other sessions of our historical committee videos.
Thank you.